Let's discuss the finer points of targeting. When a unit, war camp, or settlement uses an ability which targets another in-game object, that is, other units, war camps, or settlements, even terrain, the player must go through a selection process to identify which of these aforementioned in-game objects are to be affected by the targeting ability. When a targeting ability cannot identify a valid target within its targeting range and conditions, that ability cannot be performed. Unless specified otherwise, a targeting ability defaults to one valid in-game object, meaning you have to target at least one thing when using an ability. Both enemy and ally in-game objects can be selected as a valid target, even when using an attack ability. So you could target and attack your own allies with any attack-based ability. All attack abilities are inherently a targeting ability and cannot be performed if there are no valid targets within their specified targeting range. By default, an attack ability only has one valid target, but there are some attacks that can have multiple targets, which will be explicitly stated within each of those unique attack abilities. Some attack abilities will have conditions which restrict or expand the number of valid targets. For example, the Carpathian vampires cannot target undead units with their neckbite ability, making undead units an invalid target for neckbite. By default, units cannot target themselves unless their ability specifically indicates otherwise. Attack abilities with multiple targets, like the Painbringer's Burst of Pain ability, do not allow them to include themselves as a valid target. By default, terrain is not a valid target for an attack ability. When an attack ability has multiple targets, recalculate the attack per turn and base attack damage bonuses and penalties for each target separately. Targeting abilities will always indicate within its details the range or distance in spaces by which the potential targets of the ability can fall within for player consideration and target selection. Targeting range is always centered on the unit, war camp, or settlement that is performing the ability and spreads outwards in a north, south, east, west direction. For attack abilities, there are melee and ranged attack icons that are red straight arrows for melee and curved red arrows for ranged. These icons are used to streamline the targeting range and conditions of those particular abilities. Melee attacks utilize the targeting range of nearby, while ranged attacks utilize the targeting of within X spaces. When combat involves war camps or settlements, targeting is handled differently. In these cases, the borders of the war camp or settlement must be considered. When calculating the targeting distance, count the number of spaces away from the ability performing in-game object using the adjacent four-way north, south, east, or west directions for each space being counted. Never count diagonal spaces. The minimum targeting range of any ability always includes the battle map space that the in-game object currently occupies. For those abilities which do not indicate a targeting range or distance, then the player can assume that the ability's range is considered unlimited or global, which allows them to potentially target all objects on the battle map. Regarding the term nearby, this term is used as shorthand to indicate a targeting range of 1. That is, the immediate 4 adjacent spaces surrounding the ability user. In addition, there is an elevation restriction for nearby. If a unit were occupying ground terrain, their nearby ability can only target in-game objects that are within 1 space and also occupying ground terrain. It would not be able to target units that are currently occupying the sky, even if they were within 1 space. Conversely, if an ability performing unit were occupying sky terrain, they would only be able to target other sky terrain occupying units with a nearby targeting ability, and not those that occupy the ground. Melee attack abilities use a nearby targeting range. The targeting range of within X spaces is as follows. Any ability that states within X spaces indicates that the maximum targeting distance of that ability is up to X spaces away. By default, all within X spaces abilities include both ground or sky occupying targets. However, some abilities may explicitly state that they have conditional details which limit the target selection to only sky or only ground. Ranged attack abilities use the within X spaces targeting range. Some Warlord abilities and other in-game effects instead designate a targeting range based on the Warlord's listed presence stat. The within presence targeting range works in exactly the same manner that within X spaces does, where X is based on the Warlord's listed presence stat value. As with within X spaces, the within presence targeting range defaults to including both ground and sky occupying targets. The targeting range of war camps and settlements is based directly on the current size and expansion of their borders. This targeting range works the same as within X spaces but applies to the unique abilities of war camps and settlements. The unique aspect of within borders is that it also overrides the targeting range of all units that want to target and assault a war camp or settlement. For this exception, units can only target war camps and settlements with an attack ability if they currently occupy its borders. This means that the attacking unit must be within X spaces of the war camp or settlement's battle map game piece. These units can occupy either ground or sky terrain regardless of whether they are using a melee or ranged attack. Thus, the effective targeting range of borders includes both ground and sky terrain. So long as a unit is within the borders of a war camp or settlement, regardless of whether they are on ground or sky terrain, they are its occupant. Units can only target a war camp or settlement with an attack exclusively, regardless of however many targets an attack would otherwise allow. War camps can target and attack other war camps and settlements as long as they have overlapping border spaces with each other. Settlements can also target and attack war camps that have overlapping border spaces with it. War camps and settlements, upon reaching higher levels, will increase their border size stat. Also, their attack ability will be capable of selecting additional targets so long as each target is within their respective borders. The second major factor for determining a valid target is whether the target satisfies the targeting condition of an ability's effect. Targeting conditions are found within the details of the targeting ability being performed. These are the qualifier properties by which a target must test true in order to satisfy being a valid target. These conditions always restrict and reduce the target selection from all possible in-game objects to an exclusively defined subset. If an ability specifically states, for example, target unit within 2 spaces, it restricts the set of potential targets to any unit on the battle map that is also within 2 spaces of the ability user. Although other in-game objects, war camps, settlements, terrain, etc., could fall within the targeting range, they cannot be selected as a valid target because they do not satisfy the qualifying condition of being a unit. As another example, an ability may state that a target must be an enemy squad unit. This means that war camps, settlements, or ally squad units will not be valid targets for that ability. Each property of the condition, enemy, squad, unit, must be true for each in-game object to be a valid target. Regarding special targeting attacks, some attack abilities will have special enhancements or restrictions within the ability's details for which in-game objects can be targeted and whether more than one target can be selected. The three most common special targeting attack effects are as follows: splash, ground, and area. A splash attack is a special type of targeting effect which allows for selecting X additional units to be targeted with the attack ability. Splash attacks don't need to initially target a unit and can instead target an unoccupied terrain as the first initial target. Then it can splash onto X nearby neighboring units. Because splash attacks can target up to X valid targets, these additional targets beyond the initial target are always optional. Ground is another special type of targeting effect which can only select targets on ground terrain. Range attack abilities with the ground effect cannot target units that occupy sky terrain, even if the unit itself using the ground-based attack ability is in the sky. For example, we have the vermin bombers here taking its turn and is going to use their cluster bomb ability, which reads as follows. It's a range attack that can target up to 2 spaces away and requires paying 1 supply. Cluster bomb deals fire or acid damage and gains +1 attack versus small, +1 attack versus plant, has ground as a special targeting, and splash of 2. So what this means is that the vermin bombers can target as its initial target the begotten witches here on the ground. Because of splash, they can splash onto 2 more adjacent targets, 2 more nearby targets from the initial. In this case, they're going to splash onto the boulder hurlers here and the adept archers. The vermin bombers get a base of 3 attacks, so that'll be 3 iterations, and the damage type that's going to be used has to apply to all the targets of that attack. So in this case, the vermin bomber is going to choose fire damage instead of acid damage because the begotten witches resist acid and none of these 3 units resist fire. And that's going to be 3 attacks of fire damage onto the begotten witches, 3 attacks of fire damage onto the adept archers, and 3 attacks of fire damage onto the boulder hurlers. Make note that having multiple targets of an attack does not cause a splitting of your attacks per turn. By having more than 1 target for an attack ability, your attacks per turn are effectively getting multiplied across each of those targets. The last special type of targeting attack is area. Area is a special type of targeting effect which must simultaneously target all possible units within the specified range, not including itself, regardless if they are an enemy or an ally unit. In this scenario here, we have the begotten witches, the boulder hurlers, and the vermin bombers occupying sky terrain. The painbringers have an area-based ability called Burst of Pain, and they are positioned on the ground right here. Now, Burst of Pain is a ranged attack of up to 2 spaces away, requires sacrificing 1 member to be used. It deals death damage and gains +2 attacks versus small units. In addition, it is an area-based ability which states targets all possible units within range. So the Painbringers are going to first sacrifice 1 member, therefore taking 1 damage in order to perform their Burst of Pain ability. This also means because they are a squad unit and they have accumulated damage, their 3 attacks per turn is going to be reduced by 1 because they are now effectively damaged. So when selecting targets, it'll be all targets within 2 spaces of the Painbringers. This also means that player 1's Begotten Witches will be targeted, player 2's Vermin Bombers will be targeted, and player 3's own ally, Boulder Hurlers, is going to be targeted, all part of the Burst of Pain attack. So 2 attacks of 1 damage death to the Begotten Witches, 2 attacks, 1 damage each of death to the Boulder Hurlers, and for the Vermin Bombers, it would be 2 attacks, but because they are occupying sky terrain, and Burst of Pain is a ranged attack, it gets +1 additional attack. So that's going to be 3 accumulated damage onto the Vermin Bombers.